Just ahead on this edition of News On, protests erupt all across the nation, resulting in 2 officers being shot in the wake of Breonna Taylor's indictment decision.
To my knowledge, they are both non-life threatening. That's about as deep as I can go right now.
Do you know where they were shot?
We're not releasing the names of the officers at this time.
Plus, the president takes action today that could affect your health care coverage. Find out how. That and so much more on this edition of News On. And hello and welcome to News On. I'm Miranda. Thank you so much for joining us. We begin today with 2 police officers being shot and outrage pouring out into the streets of Louisville and all across the country. This after the state of Kentucky announced that only 1 former police officer will be indicted in the Breonna Taylor's case. The grand jury decision coming just 6 months after her death at the hands of police executing a warrant. President Trump weighed in during a White House briefing yesterday.
We asked you earlier today about the Breonna Taylor case.
Yes.
Could you comment now? I assume you've been briefed.
Many of them angry and confused, seeming to shed tears. Demonstrators who spent months calling for prosecution of police officers in the deadly shooting of Breonna Taylor resumed their protest again yesterday. And what began as a peaceful one quickly turned violent as police and protesters clashed. The Louisville Metro Police Department confirming that 2 of their officers were again shot during those protests last night.
Tonight, our officers were called to the area of Brooklyn College on a large crowd and shots fired in the area. As they were deploying to investigate what was going on at First and Broadway, shots rang out and 2 of our officers were shot. Both officers are currently undergoing treatment at University Hospital. One is in alert and stable. The other officer is currently undergoing surgery and stable. We do have 1 suspect in custody.
Interim Police Chief Robert Schroeder told reporters that 1 officer, again, as you just heard, is in surgery. He's expecting both of these officers to survive. The names of them have not been released. The president offering his support for the wounded officers, tweeting this, that he's praying for them and that he has already spoken to the state's governor about this particular incident. Meanwhile, going to Seattle now, officers there say that they arrested 13 people during protests that happened last night that left multiple officers injured. One was even struck in the head with a baseball bat, cracking his helmet. You see it right there on your screen. Charges against those arrested included property destruction, resisting arrest, failure to disperse, and as you saw, assault on an officer. The department also acknowledged there is video that has been circulating online of an officer's bike rolling over the head of a person that was lying on the ground. Officials said in a news release, quote, the matter will be referred to the Office of Professional Accountability and be further investigated. The protests in Seattle were just, as I mentioned, part of a nationwide reaction to the lack of charges brought against those officers when it comes to Breonna Taylor's death. But protesters weren't the only ones who were caught inciting violence. In Colorado, as you can see, Denver police have a man in custody. Here's a look at some of those violent protests. In custody after he drove a car through a protest in the city's downtown. The protesters were gathered outside the Capitol, as you can see. And this was outside the Capitol building in Denver last night. Thankfully, police say no one was hurt. A pickup truck also ran into a protester, though, while driving through a crowd in Buffalo, New York. Now, the crowd was demonstrating against the indictment announced again and the deadly shooting of Breonna Taylor. Officers arrested that driver. In other news today, President Trump is expected to announce a series of executive actions on health care today in an attempt to shore up his record on the issue. For more on what we can expect, I'm pleased to welcome in Doug Badger. He is a visiting fellow in domestic policy studies at the Heritage Foundation and is well-versed in the president's policy changes. Doug, thank you so much for coming on News On today. Good to have you.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, Doug, let's start here. First, what are you expecting to see in the president's healthcare actions? He's expected to make that announcement, I believe, in North Carolina today, one of many stops that he's making.
Well, I do expect him to do more to take on the medical industrial complex, trying to give people more choices of healthcare options, lower costs, and better quality of coverage, particularly for those with pre-existing medical conditions.
Yeah, talk to us also, because I know there's something that's been reported about this Born Alive executive action that he plans to take. Again, he's expected to make that announcement in North Carolina, where he's going to be making a campaign spot. Can you tell us a little bit more details about what that will entail?
Well, no, I have not seen the executive order, but it does concern the issue where during an abortion, a baby is born alive. And the question is to the requirements that medical staff give that baby the same sort of treatment that they would give to any baby born alive that requires such treatment.
Yeah, you talked about that, again, this is being reported, and of course we'll hear more from the president a little later, but that it would be more about neonatal care, and that if a baby does in fact survive an abortion, that baby would be tended to. Real quickly, the other action that the president expected to take would be preventing patients from receiving those, I'm in favor of this, those surprise medical bills, right?
Yeah, that's so important. Look, all of us who have insurance, most of us who have insurance, have networks, and we understand that we need to see network physicians in network facilities, or we're going to get hit with very big medical bills. And what started to happen, particularly in emergency rooms, which is really infuriating, is hospitals contract with doctors who aren't part of those networks, and 6 weeks later you get a bill for $50,000 or $60,000. That's got to stop.
Right. Well, hopefully we'll see what the president has to say. Doug Badger, thank you so much for joining us. Pleasure to have you. Hope to have you back on again, sir.
Thank you.
Still ahead on this edition of News On, our panel is going to weigh in on the recent protests that we were showing you that have been happening all across the country in regards to that grand jury decision. We're going to get their thoughts and share them with you coming up right after the break. You're watching News On. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. And welcome back to News On. I'm Miranda Khan. As we've been mentioning throughout the program, protests just erupting all over the country last night after a grand jury ruled against bringing up charges for the death of Breonna Taylor. Police shot Taylor after bursting into her home. This happened March 13th during a drug raid. The grand jury instead decided to charge 3 lesser counts of endangerment against fire police officer Brett Hankinson, again for the shooting into Taylor's neighborhood homes during that raid. Joining us live now to discuss this case and the situations that have occurred since is former NFL player and Black Voices for Trump member Jack Brewer. We also have with us former Obama campaign director and retired U.S. Army Ranger Robin Biro, joining us for the first time in the program. Good to see you again.
You too.
And former U.S. Navy intelligence officer and retired Nutley, New Jersey Police Lieutenant Steve Rogers. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us here on News On. Pleasure to have you.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Miranda.
Thanks for having me.
So, Jack, I want to start with you. What are your just initial reactions of what appears to be one of the most violent nights that we've seen in protests going on, again, all across the country?
Sadness. I think all Americans are sad. I mean, no matter, what your opinion is on this case, at the end of the day, you don't want to see any revenge, retaliation, shooting at police officers. I mean, this is just not going to help the legacy of Breonna Taylor. This is not going to help the plight for African-American justice. It's not going to help any of that. All it's going to do is cause more division and more hate. And, when you look at a case like this that was already so divisive, the sad reality is that most of us don't even truly know all the details of the case. And we have gotten into the habit in our nation of not letting our justice system play out. When in fact, all over the world, people dream to have a justice system that will actually play out and give rights to people. But we got to start letting that actually take place and not keep and continue to lead with emotions, but that's lead with facts and reality.
Lieutenant Rogers, when you see the violence that you're seeing erupting last night, what is your reaction? Because I'm sure you still have lots of friends that are officers right now who are probably scared for their lives.
Well, people who have never walked in the shoes of a police officer and were shot at, and I was, by the way, I was in a gun battle in the 1990s, have absolutely no understanding of what goes through the mind of a police officer. No officer wakes up and wants to ever be involved in a shooting, let alone a fatal shooting. But as my friend just mentioned on the air with you, people have to let the process work. It is working. It's a grand jury that made the decision, and now it's going to have to go a step further to a court hearing. But I truly believe that the African-American community, they do have legitimate arguments with regard to how they're treated, not by the police, but by politicians, by the political structures that we have across these cities. And unfortunately, their message is being hijacked by individuals who have another agenda, and that's to advance a socialist agenda in this country and to tear down, not build up, our system of justice. This is what the fear that not only police officers have, but citizens have. When we lose law and order, we lose our country.
Robin.
This is a tough one, Miranda. My heart hurts. Just like Jack said, I'm sad too. We're all sad. And yes, this was a grand jury decision. And we're trying to let the process roll. But just like the lieutenant said, there's justifiable anger here. I get it. But as a Democrat, as a strategist here, as a Democratic strategist, I just can't help but think that this is pretty bad strategy for the Democratic Party going into this election season. So I have concerns about how we actually look as a party right now with all of this divisiveness, because I think a lot of it's pinned on our shoulders, and that's not good.
Yeah, well, for weeks we didn't hear anybody really from the Democratic Party, condemning the violence. Now, of course, we're hearing it all the time. Does that, in your opinion, mean that it's doing exactly what you said it was going to do, that it wasn't working, and this is why Democrats have kind of shifted, if you will?
Yes, as you saw, the polls have narrowed, and that was a concern. This was something that the Biden campaign chose to just let play out. It wasn't their fight to fight. They were going to let this play out and let the public do what they do. But with polls tightening, we had to address it. I'm glad they did, but it's a little too late, and now it's actually hurting us more than it's helping us, Miranda.
Jack, I want to get you to weigh in on that. I also want to get your take as a former NFL player. A lot of athletes responding to this decision. What's your opinion of that? Is that working in favor of them or against them when so many people are missing seeing sports again just be sports?
You know, the sports thing it's tough. I mean, it's similar to politics in a lot of ways because, you know, if you're a Democrat, which I've been a Democrat all my life, you are pressured because of the emotions of your base and the emotions of the people that, you know, are up in arms right now. No matter what the scenario is or the facts of the case, there's a lot of people in our country that no matter what Breonna Taylor did or her boyfriend did, all those things don't matter. They're upset because a white cop killed a black person. Let's be honest, right? And that same attitude and perspective is what you see out of our athletes and our influencers and our African Americans across this nation that are standing up and literally demanding people to say this woman's name. And I just think it's gone a little too far. I think at the end of the day, we say we want justice and we say we want unity, but the words that are coming out of our mouths and the actions that we have are not going to bring that. And it goes back, if you want to get to the root of it, we have to all ask ourselves, where do we find our truth? Are we finding our truth through emotion? Or are we finding our truth through God, the Word of God, and spirituality? Because if you are, then you know that we have to not just get angry at our enemies, but we have to pray for our enemies, right? And we have to come together and unify. And even though sometimes things may not look right to us, we know that we have a much bigger God that we serve. And if we don't have that perspective, then we're going to have mob rules. We're going to have people going at each other in a country divided. And at the end of the day, we have to remember that we're one nation under God. And let's all pray that we get back to that.
Robin, I have to ask you, there's been a lot of speculation that some of these protests are being paid for, if you will, by certain members on the left. And I'm not going to mention any names because none of that has been verified. But that has been something that has been circulating for quite some time. Do you think there is any truth to that?
No, I honestly don't. I've been there at some of these protests. Well, in 2016, things have gotten a little bit too crazy right now for me to take. I've got children. So, you know, with what's going on right now, I don't attend those. But I have before. They weren't handing out checks then. I think that's just a crazy talking point. I don't think there's any truth to it, Miranda.
Lieutenant, final word to you just in regards to this. As I'm hearing people on the left, the right, everyone saying they want this to end. But clearly, it seems like there's no end in sight. Maybe we'll see it after the election. Who knows? But right now, what needs to happen to kind of bring this country together? Because it'd be nice if that could happen before Election Day.
Well, we need to understand that the black community and the police community truly want to work together as partners. I've been in police work for 38 years, and the greatest times I ever had was with people in a minority community working together vis-a-vis community policing. But the deep cause, the real cause, is our politicians on both parties. They promised so much to so many and delivered nothing to people that are being affected. When we see what's happening in Chicago, that isn't the police fault. That isn't the minority's fault. Those are the politicians' fault. And as my good friend here on the NFL said, the Word of God, you know, prayer, those are things we need to turn to. And I've urged the members of the pulpit, of the religious community to step up and to start doing what they need to do to get into the soul and the spirit of the American people. That's where it all begins to end.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we'll have to end it there. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here on News On. Pleasure to have all of you. Hope to have you back on.
Thank you, Miranda.
And stay safe. And God bless.
Thank you.
You too. Thank you.
Still ahead here on News On, we're going to get you to weigh in on some of the questions that we've been asking you on social media because we always want to hear your voice. Also coming up, the president of programming, Dr. Gina Loudon, on the ground in Jacksonville, Florida, where the president's going to be holding a rally. We're going to get her thoughts on what the president is expected to say. We're also going to make some pretty big announcements. You'll want to stay tuned for that. You're watching News On. We'll be right back. Welcome back to News On. I'm Miranda Khan. Former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg is spending some of his political capital to help ex-felons vote in the upcoming election. So far, he's raised more than $16 million to pay the court fees and fines for thousands of Black and Latino voters, specifically in Florida. Back in 2018, the state restored voting rights to people with felony convictions. Murder and sex offenses are the exception to that. Republicans later passed a law that requires former felons to pay all of their outstanding debts, which include court fees. Bloomberg has committed to spending at least $100 million to help his former opponent, Joe Biden, win Florida. But here's where things get, well, a little dicey. Florida's Attorney General has requested that the FBI and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement investigate Bloomberg's efforts to reinstate the voting rights of felons by paying their fees. For much more on this story, we'd like to welcome in our Washington, D.C. correspondent with Just the News, Sophie Mann. Sophie, so we know that they've started an investigation, obviously, into the money from Bloomberg. What else can you tell us about this?
Hi, Miranda. Yeah, that's right. You just gave a pretty great summary of what's going on. But effectively, what the Attorney General's office is right now trying to look into is if this movement by former New York City Mayor Bloomberg will end up impacting the election in a way that sort of works against the court decision that just came down in Florida that says these former convicted felons have to pay their fines and legal fees prior to voting. So will this tilt the balance in an unjust way? Are these donations that former Mayor Bloomberg has solicited, are they sort of political in nature, despite the fact that the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition is an apolitical network in its being?
Yeah, and when we talk about these fees, these could be fees that they actually owe to the victims. You know, the Democrats are trying to say that, Republicans are playing politics, whereas on the other side, you have Republicans saying that, suggesting that Bloomberg may be buying votes. Sticking with Florida, though, for just a bit, yesterday, as we mentioned here on this show, Governor Ron DeSantis, pretty aggressive stance against the defund the police groups. What steps have been taken since that announcement? Can you tell us about?
Yeah, so Governor DeSantis is bringing an extra spotlight to an issue that has very much been in the national media, a central focal point of the presidential campaigns. He has sort of now moved to introduce new legislation to the Florida State House that would create new felony misdemeanor charges that would be applied to participants in riots who ended up damaging property, inflicting personal harm. So basically his new legislation, which will be taken up by the Florida State House in its new session beginning in 2021, will outline harsher punishments for people who are disturbing the peace during what Democrats are calling primarily peaceful riots, but some Republicans, including Governor DeSantis, have identified as threats to civil rest.
Yeah, and I want to shift gears a little bit before we let you go to international politics. You've been following a story about the administration's decision to sanction Iran's Revolutionary Court for what it considers gross violations of human rights. Can you explain real briefly what this means?
Yes, so this is a big story today. Expected a little bit later in the day, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is going to announce that the State Department will be leveraging sanctions against Iran's Revolutionary Court and specific judges on that court as well, which up until this very day, the State Department had set a precedent that they would not go after courts of foreign lands, just because that was a little bit outside the pale. But in particular, following the execution earlier this month of 27-year-old wrestler Naveed Afkari, the State Department has decided that Iran's Revolutionary Court's human rights offenses are so egregious and that what they call their court system actually works in a way that would effectively be unrecognizable to people in the United States or other free nations as a court. So they have decided that makes Iran sort of an exception to the rule and will be leveraging these maximum pressure sanctions against Iran.
Sophie Mann, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Sophie Mann with Just the News. Always good to have you. And following the president's speech today on his plans to take action on health care, something we mentioned at the top of the show, he will quickly make his way from North Carolina, again, where he's expected to make that announcement, to Jacksonville, Florida, where he will speak to a crowd of supporters. And our very own Dr. Gina Loudon is in Jacksonville right now and joins us live to give us a little bit of a preview about this event. And Dr. Gina, as you know, Florida is this key battleground state for these candidates. According to a newly released Washington Post ABC News poll, Trump is leading in the Sunshine State. Now, assuming that is correct, what does the president need to do to maintain that lead, and what can we expect to hear from him during his rally tonight?
Well, I imagine we'll hear a lot about that poll, Miranda, and I imagine that will give a whole new energy to the rally goers who will already be amped up, no doubt about it. But for a long time, people have been dissecting these polls and finding that a lot of times, the people that are polled are not the people who actually go and vote. We saw this back in 2016. So polls don't tend to intimidate rally goers to begin with, but to see a poll come out from not necessarily conservative Trump outlets, if you will, ABC and Washington Post, to see a poll come out and say, yes, indeed, Trump is ahead, I have a feeling this will be a shot of adrenaline to the rally goers this evening, and it will probably be palpable in the room.
Now, we've heard speculation that the president could be meeting with one of the women on his short list for the vacancy left behind by the late Justice Ginsburg, and that would be Judge Barbara Lagoa in Miami. But then there's been some reports saying that the president doesn't plan to go there. What are you hearing?
I think it would be very smart if he does meet with her, at least meet with her, even if ultimately she isn't his selection. I think that, of course, she has a lot of support being from the Latina community here in Florida, where, of course, it is such a key swing state. They say that you can't win without Florida. Certainly, I can tell you that Floridians believe that as a Floridian. Now that President Trump has chosen Florida as his home, as you know, and her being from, of course, this state, I think it would be smart for him to meet with her to at least show that he gave her that deference, even if ultimately he doesn't choose her. So my guess would be he's probably going to make time to do that.
Yeah, we'll have to see what happens. Again, making a lot of announcements today is going to be announcing some executive orders when it comes to health care. That's supposed to take place in North Carolina. But we have another big announcement that we want to bring up here on News On. So you have been a busy bee making some partnership deals when it comes to our network. We are now Real America's Voice. We just heard from Sophie Mann with Just the News. You're going to be announcing more and more shows coming up on this network. What can you tell us right now, though?
Yes, we are developing 1 to 2 shows a week for the next several weeks, hopefully. As you know, producing these shows and developing them, there are lots of little things that can delay that. But right now, we have 3 new shows in development. John Solomon and I have been making the radio rounds around the country talking about these. We're very excited. Some of them focus on national security issues. We have an all-star lineup coming up in our daytime news portion of our outlet, and many of these shows are controlled by Just the News and John Solomon. We're announcing those and rolling those out this week. They'll be coming out in the next few weeks, and some really great stars like John Solomon himself leading a Sunday show that is going to be just imaginative and wonderful, like no Sunday show anyone has seen, but old style news with a modern twist, and super exciting. We have Eric Greitens leading one, Carrie Sheffield, young millennial doing wonderful things, and of course David Brody starts his show today at 4 o'clock, so we want everyone to tune into that.
A lot going on. Dr. Gina Loudon live for us in Jacksonville, Florida, again, where the president is expected to hold a rally. We're going to bring you coverage here, live coverage here on Real America's Voice, beginning at 6:30 Eastern Time. And we just want to mention we're pleased because we're also simulcasting with John Frederick's radio network here on this program. Stick around. There is much more to come here on News On, including your voice. We'll be right back. Welcome back to News On. Now we'd like to send it over to Weather Nation's Kara James and Rob Bradley for a look at your nationwide forecast.
I'm meteorologist Kara James here with your Weather Nation update, tracking some of our top national weather headlines, continuing with the heavy rain threat with the remnants of Beta moving through parts of the southeast, continuing to dump a lot of heavy rain. And there is a flash flood watch and flood watches for parts of Mississippi into Alabama and even southern Tennessee for rain anywhere from 2 to 5 inches with some locally higher totals possible and the potential for some isolated flash flooding. That will be through the day today. And additionally, we have a low end severe weather threat, mainly for the form of gusty winds and brief weak spin-up tornadoes for areas south of I-20 in Alabama. This includes Montgomery into Columbus, Georgia, Dothan, Alabama, and even parts of the Florida Panhandle from Tallahassee all the way over to the west, and even Mobile Bay as well could see some of these brief weak spin-ups. We typically see this with landfalling tropical systems east of the center. As what's left of Beta continues to move to the east into tomorrow, we will see that severe weather threat shift to the east as well. Most of Georgia, a lot of South Carolina and southeastern North Carolina dealing with the potential for some gusty storms and brief weak spin-ups as well. And that's where that heavy rain threat will then move as well. We'll see all of the heavy rain across parts of Tennessee move into parts of North Carolina through the later part of the day and overnight. These outer bands, though, into this afternoon are what we would be a little concerned about for those brief weak spin-ups, with the threat transitioning further to the east as we go later on into tonight and tomorrow, with the potential for some very heavy rain across the Carolinas and even as far north as Virginia. This is just one of our top national weather headlines. We also have to talk about rain in the northwest part of the country. Rob has the details on that.
Yeah, I had some record rainfall in Seattle on Wednesday, picking up just under an inch of rain, expecting more of that heavy rain to move in overnight Thursday into Friday with this next wave of moisture, much needed for wildfires across Oregon and Washington. Unfortunately, most of this precipitation is going to be missing those wildfires in California, but this will taper down the smoke a little bit across the northwest, but it is going to push it across the interior and then down into portions of Utah and Nevada over the next several days. So we're expecting several rounds of precipitation by the end of the weekend. Most of that heavy rain, however, looks to stay mostly to the north of Washington, though we could see some more heavy showers move in by Sunday. Thursday and Friday look to see the heavier showers across portions of the mountains, so we do have a risk for isolated flash flooding in both of those locations on Thursday and Friday. The heaviest rain spreads across the interior, expecting scattered showers throughout your Thursday afternoon across the Cascades, with the next round of heavy rain bringing in that potential for flash flooding into your Friday morning, Friday afternoon. So Seattle's commute expected to be impacted by heavy showers early Friday. Portland and Spokane, you get some of the heavier showers by the time we get to late Friday morning to Friday afternoon. And especially the burn scar areas, the areas that have seen wildfires burning this year, are going to be especially susceptible to flash flooding and mudslides. That's the latest from us here at Weather Nation. You can always get more updates on our website anytime at weathernationtv.com.
Thanks so much. In other news today, TikTok's owner ByteDance applies for a Chinese license to close a U.S. deal. It comes after TikTok confirmed the proposed deal with Oracle and Walmart so that the app can still operate here in the U.S. The application also comes after China's Ministry of Commerce introduced a revised catalog of technologies prohibited and restricted from export last month. A spokesperson for China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs says China urges the U.S. side to respect market economy and principles, abide by international treaty rules, and to provide an open, fair, and non-discriminatory and just environment for foreign companies operating in the U.S. And here is something that is trending this morning. A Texas millionaire is joining the legal fight to free the Tiger King, Joe Exotic. Yep. Eric Love is working with a group of lawyers who call themselves Team Tiger, who are asking President Trump to pardon the Netflix TV star. Joe Exotic is the stage name, of course, for Joseph Allen, who is currently being held in prison in Fort Worth. The Tiger King was convicted of murder for hire plot targeting Carol Baskin, who is currently appearing on the ABC's Dancing with the Stars. If you haven't watched it, you really should. They have put together a 257-page legal document to be delivered to the White House that they claim proves his innocence. There is still much more to come here on News On, including your voice. Plus, you want to stay tuned for our question of the day. We'll be right back. Welcome back to News On. I'm Miranda Khan. It's time for our favorite segment of the show, and that is when we air your voice. That is our goal here at Real America's Voice, is to give you a platform where you feel free to share your thoughts and opinions. You can always do so by joining our community platform, which you can find on our website at americasvoice.news, or you can reach out to us on social media. We'd like to ask you a question. You can submit your comment, or you can even ask us a question to pose to our viewers, and we may just air it here on this very program. So here is the question that we asked last night. We asked the first presidential debate is September 29th. What topic are you looking forward to hearing from the candidates the most, and why? And let's start off with Jimmy H. He reached out to us via Twitter saying this: Biden plans to save lives. He says he has a plan to save lives, but apparently it's a secret while people continue to die from COVID-19. He goes on to say, I also want to hear how he's going to fund all the progressive dreams without raising taxes on the middle class. A health tax is still a tax. Thank you for that, Jimmy. You can always watch our live coverage and maybe you'll get your answer. All right, next one, we have Eric Rosenberg, and based on his response, well, I would say he's pretty excited. So excited, in fact, that he already has his snack strategy planned out. He says, I have popcorn ready. Can't wait to hear what comes out of Biden's mouth. Yeah, I think a lot of people are kind of excited to see that, especially. All right, next up, we have Mobley joining us, Jess, joining us from Instagram, took a bit of a pessimistic approach, saying that he doesn't even think the debates are even going to happen. He says the debates, they'll never happen. Interesting response. You know, I don't think he's really alone on that. I think there were a lot of people speculating whether or not it will still happen. Again, that's set for September 29th, so we'll just have to see. I hope so, because I love seeing those. And finally, Frank Davanzo asked several questions. The first two being this: he reached out to us via Facebook. Why did your son take, and he's referring to Biden, $3.5 million from Russia while you were in office, Mr. Biden? He asked this question as well. Why was he receiving $83,000 a month for a gas and oil board of directors for never showing up to one meeting while you were in office? Thank you, Frank, and thank you all for sharing your voice. Doesn't matter if you're on the left, you're on the right, you're on the spectrum, anything in between. We always want to hear from you. Before we continue, we want to ask you this question. This is our question today. What's the number one issue influencing your vote this election year, and why? And I'm sure there are several, but we just want to key in on that number one issue. You can send us a video. We love video here. Leave us a comment, or you can private message us your answer. And guess what? We may just air it here tomorrow, right here on News on Real America's Voice. And again, where can you find us? You can find us everywhere. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Parlay, Cloud Hub, LinkedIn, and of course, our online community platform at americasvoice.news. And don't forget, download our app. You can always take us with you. We love that. There's so much more to come here on News On. Coming up, which city do you think ranks at the top when it comes to serving the best coffee? We'll have the answer coming up right after the break. Welcome back to News On. I'm Miranda Khan. Travel might be difficult in 2020, but United Airlines is looking to make it a little bit easier. The carrier launched an interactive map feature, partnering with Google Flight Search Enterprise technology. Customers can use a map search on United's website to find less expensive ticket options. Gotta love that idea. A United official says this provides all-in-one solution that streamlines the search process. Members of Mileage Plus will also be able to use a Where Have I Been feature that highlights all past trips taken with United. Cool. I like the cheap flights. That's a good idea. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station had to maneuver to avoid a piece of space debris from hitting them Tuesday. Yeah, NASA says this is the third time in the last 2 weeks that the space station has come into close contact with space trash. Who knew it was such a problem? Thankfully, no one was harmed, and the astronauts were able to resume regular activities once that maneuver was completed. But so far, again, 3 times in 2020, the space crew has had to navigate its way out of a collision with orbiting junk. There are millions of pieces of spacecrafts, parts of rockets, and out-of-commission satellites in low Earth orbit. Wow, look at that. You can really see it. In February, President Trump put in a $15 million request to help the space program respond to issues like all the scrap metal that you see in space right there. And speaking of NASA, the space agency's work in outer space may help make travel on Earth a little easier. We love to hear that. NASA's laser-based technology was developed for lunar landings. However, the intelligence gathered will be used to aid self-driving cars get through rush hour traffic. I don't know why, but that still scares me. The technology will be tested further on suborbital rocket launches. Yeah, let's do a few more tests first. What do you think? All right, calling all coffee lovers, and I'm a huge coffee lover. Looking for a place to visit? Well, this new report is for you. Yes, this should get you moving on this day, let's say. The personal finance site Wallet Hub has ranked the best coffee cities in the U.S. Researchers compared 100 of the largest cities in America for this report. And they looked at everything from the number of coffee shops in that city to the average price for a pack of coffee. They found that Seattle, Washington, probably no big shock there, was the best city for coffee lovers, followed by San Francisco, California, Portland, Oregon, and this might shock some of you. It doesn't shock people that live in Florida, but Miami, Florida, also on that list. And another city, Tampa, rounded out the top 5. If you've ever had Cuban coffee, you will understand why. So if you do come to either one of those cities in Florida, I highly recommend it. Again, want to remind all of you that we're going to have live rally coverage. The president is making several stops today, including one in North Carolina, but he's also going to be doing a rally that's going to take place in Jacksonville, Florida. Our very own Dr. Gina Loudon, who is also the president of programming here for Real America's Voice, is already on the ground there. We're going to be having live coverage beginning at 6:30 Eastern Time. It'll be interesting because, again, the president is expected to make some executive action when it comes to health care in this country. That's going to be taking place in North Carolina. We'll, of course, continue to follow that story here on Real America's Voice. It'll be interesting to hear what people in Jacksonville have to say about that, because health care is a big issue in this battleground state, which, again, according to some of the latest reports, President Trump appears to be leading Biden in that state. So again, you'll want to stay tuned for that. President expected to speak at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. And that will do it for this edition of News On. As always, you can follow us on social media. And please feel free to join our community page, which you can find on our website. Again, that is americasvoice.news. Thank you so much for watching, and be sure and answer our question of the day. We'd love to hear from you. Encourage your friends to take part. You can also, I have my director in my ear, David, say, please, we want to see you. Submit a video. Don't be so shy. It can be like 20 seconds. You just take it on your phone. We want to share your voice. That's what we're all about. After all, we work for you. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Hope to hear from you soon.